Howdy, y'all. Come on in and rest up. I just got the fire going, so stay a while and let me tell y'all a story to help you fall asleep. Now, I know you're here to wind down and relax, so why don't y'all tell me what helps you relax in the comments below. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories. So let's get to it. The wind carried the scent of salt and adventure as I stood on the dock, staring out at the sea that had been my companion for over 45 years. The morning was young, the sky a soft shade of dawn pink, and the water stretched endless before me. Eleanor, my trusty boat, bobbed gently with the tide, ready as always for another journey. Something deep in my bones told me this trip would be different, though. A gut feeling, the kind a fisherman learns to trust after a lifetime on the water. Debbie stood at the cabin door, arms crossed, a knowing look in her eyes. "You be careful out there, Jerry," she said, her voice carrying that mix of love and mild exasperation. She knew as well as I did that I wouldn't turn back, no matter what the ocean had in store. I kissed her on the forehead, grabbed my gear, and stepped onto Eleanor's deck. The engine rumbled to life beneath me, the sound a comforting promise that she was as ready as I was. The sea was calm at first, an easy ride as I made my way toward deeper waters. The sun climbed higher, warming my back, and the familiar solitude settled in. It was just me and the open water, the only company the occasional gull circling above. I cast my first line, waiting, watching, knowing that patience was the true art of fishing. It started as a subtle tug, a teasing motion that sent a thrill through my fingers. Then suddenly the line pulled hard, nearly yanking the rod from my grip. I planted my feet and reeled in, my muscles straining against the force. Whatever was on the other end was strong, determined, a fighter. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The fish wasn't giving up, and neither was I. The boat rocked as waves crashed against the hull, the fight between man and fish playing out in the heart of the deep. With each pull, I felt the power of the sea, the thrill of the chase, the unspoken respect between predator and prey. At last, the silver body of the fish broke the surface, glistening in the sunlight. A massive tuna, the biggest I had seen in years. I hauled it onto the deck, breathless, victorious. My hands shook with exhaustion, but my heart pounded with satisfaction. This was why I came out here, why I answered the call of the water time and time again. The sky darkened too quickly, the air thick with the scent of an approaching storm. I had seen enough storms to know this one wasn't going to be gentle. The waves grew restless, slamming against Eleanor's sides. I needed to head back before it was too late. Lightning split the sky, followed by the deafening roar of thunder. Rain pelted down in sheets, blinding me as I fought to steer Eleanor through the chaos. The boat lurched, nearly tipping as the waves swelled around me. My grip on the wheel tightened, knuckles white as I battled the sea's fury. For hours I wrestled against the storm, every inch of my body screaming with effort. The world was reduced to darkness and crashing water. I had been through rough seas before, but this was something else. The ocean had turned against me, and I was at her mercy. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the storm's rage softened. A strange stillness settled over the water, an eerie calm. I took a deep breath, shaking, soaked to the bone. But the battle wasn't over yet. The storm had passed, but I was left adrift. The sea stretched endlessly around me, and I had lost my bearings. My radio was silent, my compass spinning wildly. I needed to find my way home. The ocean, calm as it seemed, held unseen dangers. Strange shadows moved beneath the surface, and I knew that I was not alone. The deep had its own rules, and I was just another traveler passing through. Supplies were running low. The fresh water I had brought was nearly gone, and my stomach growled with an ache I tried to ignore. I cast my line again, hoping for another catch, something to keep me going. Night fell, bringing with it an unfamiliar loneliness. The stars above were my only company, their silent glow a reminder of how small I was in the vastness of the world. I whispered a prayer to Debbie, hoping she wasn't too worried. Morning brought a sliver of hope. A seabird landed on my deck, a sign that land wasn't far. My heart surged with renewed determination. I adjusted my course, following the bird's path. As the sun rose higher, a shape emerged from the mist. An old wreck, half sunk, drifting aimlessly. I approached cautiously, wondering what stories it held, what sailors had once called it home. Far on the horizon, a light flickered. A ship, a lighthouse. I couldn't be sure, but I set my course toward it, my spirit lifting with each passing moment. The waves grew rough again, testing my resolve. I gritted my teeth and pushed forward, the promise of safety driving me through the hardships. Land. At last I saw it, a thin line on the horizon, growing larger with each minute. My heart pounded. I was almost home. As I pulled into the dock, Debbie was there, waiting. She ran to me, her eyes filled with relief. "Took your time, didn't you?" she said, smiling through her worry. I laughed, pulling her close. The sea had tested me, but I had made it back. And as long as I had strength left in my body, I knew I would return to its call again. All right now, y'all settle in, 'cause I got another tale for you. This one's been sitting in the back of my mind for a while, just waiting for the right time to be told. You see these weathered hands? They've hauled in a lot of fish in my 68 years, but they've also felt things, unseen things. I was a younger man then, maybe pushing 23, full of vinegar, and convinced I knew everything there was to know about the Santee, Cooper lakes. My daddy taught me everything he knew, and his daddy before him. We were river rats, born and bred, lived and breathed the water. But the Santee Cooper ain't just water, son. It's history, it's mystery, it's something else entirely. This particular night, I was down at the old pier by Utahville. It was a rickety thing even then, mostly patched together with old tires and hope, but it stretched out far enough into the Black River to reach the deep holes where the big catfish like to lurk. I was after a flathead, a true monster, one that could feed a family for a week. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that sticks to you like a wet blanket. The moon was barely a sliver, hiding behind scudding clouds. The only light came from my gas lantern, casting a sickly yellow glow on the water around the pier. The crickets were singing their monotonous song, and the bullfrogs were croaking like grumpy old men. It was a perfect night for fishing, a night you could feel in your bones was going to produce something special. I had my gear all set up, a sturdy old rod my daddy had given me, a reel that whined like a lovesick dog, and a line strong enough to haul a car out of the mud. For bait, I had a live bream, wriggling on the hook like it knew its fate. I cast it out as far as I could, the line singing a little tune in the night air. Then I waited. Now I'd spent countless nights alone on that pier or on the river. Never bothered me none. I knew the sounds of the night, the rustling of the palmetto leaves, the hooting of the owls, the splash of a fish jumping. But this night was different. There was a stillness, a silence that was heavier than the humidity. The crickets stopped chirping. The bullfrogs went quiet. Even the wind held its breath. It was like the whole world was listening, waiting for something. That's when I saw it. Out of the darkness, about 50 yards downriver, a light began to glow. It wasn't harsh like a flashlight or the beam of a car. It was soft, ethereal, like the light from a firefly, but bigger, more intense. It flickered and danced just above the water, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. I knew in my gut this wasn't no ordinary light. This was something else, something ancient. The light started to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed. It moved towards me, along the surface of the water, leaving a shimmering trail in its wake. The closer it got, the colder the air became. A chill ran down my spine, raising goosebumps on my arms. My mind raced. Was it a boat? Some kind of swamp gas? I tried to rationalize it, but deep down I knew this was no earthly thing. As the light got closer, I started to hear a sound, a low, mournful hum, like the wind whistling through a hollow tree. It grew louder and louder, vibrating in my bones, filling my head with a sense of dread. Then it was right in front of the pier. The light pulsed, illuminating the water below, and that's when I saw it. Beneath the light, rising from the depths of the Black River, was a figure. It wasn't human, not exactly. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but its features were blurred, indistinct. It was made of water and light, shimmering and swirling, constantly changing. Its eyes were 2 points of intense burning light, and they were fixed on me. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, rooted to the spot like a cypress knee. I could only stare as the figure rose higher and higher out of the water. It reached a height of maybe 7 or 8 feet, towering over me. The humming intensified, and I felt a pressure in my head, a feeling of being probed, examined. It felt like the figure was looking into my soul. Then it spoke, not with a voice, not in words I could understand. It was more like a thought, a feeling, projected directly into my mind. "This is my domain," it said. "You trespass upon my waters." The words weren't spoken, but I understood them perfectly. And with them came a wave of overwhelming sadness, a sense of deep, ancient sorrow. I realized then what I was seeing. It wasn't just some random ghost or spook. It was a river spirit, a guardian of these waters, and it was not happy to see me. I managed to stammer out a reply, my voice trembling. I didn't mean any harm. I was just fishing. The figure remained silent for a moment, its luminous eyes still fixed on me. Then it spoke again. "These waters hold memories," it said, "memories of joy and sorrow, of life and death. You must respect them." I nodded frantically, desperate to appease the spirit. "I do, sir. I do respect them. You seek to take life," it said. "But do you understand the cost?" I didn't know what to say. I'd never thought about it that way before. I'd always just seen fishing as a way to put food on the table, a way to connect with nature. But now, standing before this ancient spirit, I felt a pang of guilt. I don't know, I admitted. The figure seemed to consider this. Then it said, I will let you be. But remember this night. Remember the respect these waters deserve. And with that, the light began to fade. The figure slowly sank back into the black river, disappearing into the depths from whence it came. The humming subsided, and the cold air began to warm. The crickets started chirping again. The bullfrogs resumed their croaking. The wind whispered through the palmetto leaves. The world returned to normal, but I was not the same. I stood there on the pier for a long time, shaking like a leaf. I reeled in my line, cut the bream loose, and packed up my gear. I didn't want to catch any fish that night. I didn't want to take anything from the river. As I walked back to my truck, I glanced back at the water. The moon was still hidden behind the clouds, but I could almost feel the presence of the river spirit, watching me, reminding me of the lesson I had learned. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen. Who would believe me? They'd just think I was crazy, spending too much time alone in the woods. But I couldn't forget it. The memory of the river spirit, the feeling of its presence, the weight of its words, it stayed with me. The next day I went back to the pier, but this time I didn't bring my fishing gear. I just sat there on the edge of the water, listening to the sounds of the river. I tried to understand what the spirit had meant about the memories and the respect. Over the next few weeks, I spent more time observing the river than fishing in it. I watched the birds, the otters, the turtles. I studied the way the water flowed, the way the sunlight danced on its surface. I learned about the history of the area, the stories of the Native Americans who had lived here for centuries, the battles that had been fought along its banks. I began to see the river not just as a place to catch fish, but as a living, breathing entity, a repository of history and memory. And I realized that the spirit was right. These waters deserved respect. Now I still fish. It's in my blood. I can't help it. But I fish differently now. I'm more mindful of the impact I have on the environment. I release more fish than I keep. I try to leave the river cleaner than I found it. And sometimes, when I'm out on the water at night, I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A light flickering on the surface, a ripple that doesn't seem quite natural. And I'll remember that night on the pier, and I'll say a silent prayer of thanks to the river spirit for teaching me a lesson I'll never forget. That night changed me, son. It taught me that there's more to this world than what we can see and touch. It taught me to respect the power of nature, the wisdom of the old ways, and the importance of listening to the voices of the past. So, the next time you're out on the water, remember old Jerry's story. Respect the river. Listen to the silence. And maybe, just maybe, you'll hear the whisper of the river spirit too. You might just learn something you never expected. And always remember, son, those are the best kinds of stories. The kind that make you believe. The kind that make you think. The kind that stay with you long after the embers have died down and the fire's gone out. Now, get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll go fishing. But remember what I told you. Respect the river. Y'all hang tight. I ain't done yet. Just gotta let this next story settle in my mind like a good cast sitting in the water. I'll be right back. And when I do, you best believe it'll be worth the wait. The salt hung thick in the air that day, just clinging to you like a second skin. I reckon it was late August, the kind where the sun beats down on the Gulf like a blacksmith's hammer, making the water shimmer and dance. Debbie, bless her heart, was back at the cabin, probably fussing over her begonias and getting ready for the next wave of travelers. I, on the other hand, was out there, me and my trusty boat, the salty dog, chasing the ever-elusive red drum. Now I've hooked a lot of red drum in my time, some real monsters, but this particular day felt different. It felt charged, like the air itself was humming with anticipation. I remember feeling an unusual calmness, a stillness that settled over me, like the morning mist over the bayou. Usually I'd be fidgeting, checking my lines, fussing with my bait, but that day I just let the boat drift, the rhythm of the waves rocking me into a peaceful trance. I wasn't using any fancy gear that day, just my old reliable rod, the one with the slightly worn cork grip, a simple weighted hook, and a chunk of fresh mullet. I've always been a believer in the power of simplicity, letting the fish do the talking, so to speak. Hours passed, and the sun started sinking, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. A few smaller fish had nipped at my bait, but nothing of real interest. I was content, though, just enjoying the quiet solitude of the sea. Then it happened. The rod bent over like a willow in a hurricane. Not a sharp, jarring tug, but a slow, powerful pull, like something enormous had decided to explore the depths with my line. My heart jumped into my throat, and that calm I'd been feeling turned into a thrill that ran right down to my toes. I knew, in that instant, this was no ordinary fish. I set the hook, and the fight began, a battle of wills between man and beast that played out under the fading light. This wasn't a quick, erratic fight. It was slow, deliberate, the fish pulling me one way, me giving a little, then taking some line back. It felt like I was wrestling a submerged log, an ancient leviathan that had seen centuries of the ocean's secrets. Sweat beaded on my brow as I fought the fish. My arms ached. My back was screaming, but I couldn't give up. Not now. This wasn't just about catching a fish anymore. It was about something deeper, something primal. It was about the connection between a fisherman and the sea, a respect for the power that lay beneath the surface. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and I was fighting under the soft glow of the moon. The stars started to appear, twinkling like diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. I couldn't see the fish yet, but I could feel its immense power, its resilience. I started to think I might lose, but something deep inside me wouldn't let me quit. And then, after what felt like an eternity, I saw it, a flash of silver in the moonlight, then another. I could make out the broad, powerful tail thrashing in the water as the fish broke the surface, its copper scales gleaming. It was the biggest red drum I'd ever seen, a true specimen, easily 70, maybe 80 pounds, maybe more. It looked like it could swallow my smallest dog whole. Slowly, carefully, I began to reel it in, the boat rocking with the strain. It was a delicate dance, a give and take, each movement calculated. I kept a steady hand, knowing that one wrong twitch could snap the line, or worse, break my heart. Finally, after what seemed like days, I managed to get the fish alongside the boat. I could see it clearly now, its big, soulful eye looking back at me. Now some might say I was foolish, but instead of pulling him aboard, something made me pause. I just stared at him, mesmerized. There he was, majestic and strong. I remember thinking about how many years he'd been swimming those currents, witnessing the ever-changing tides. I felt a profound respect for him, a kinship that went beyond the usual fisherman's pride. It was like I was seeing a part of myself reflected in his ancient eyes, a connection to the deeper rhythms of the universe that we all sometimes tend to forget. In that moment, the thrill of the catch faded. I knew that pulling him into the boat, taking him away from his home, just didn't feel right. So I did something I never usually do. I took my knife and carefully cut the line. I watched as the red drum paused for a moment, then, with a flick of its powerful tail, disappeared back into the darkness, sinking into the depths from whence he came. The line went slack, and the silence that followed felt both empty and profound. Now, most of the fellas from the docks would have called me a fool. They might have even laughed. Why would I release a fish like that? I could have bragged about it for years, but I didn't care. The memory of that encounter, that silent understanding between man and fish, was worth more than any trophy I could ever hang above my mantel. I pulled in my line, packed up my gear, and headed back to shore. Debbie was waiting for me, a worried look on her face, but I just smiled and told her, "I caught a big one, Debs, the biggest one I've ever seen." She asked how big in pounds, and I told her. "Oh dear," she said, "that would have been a great feast for the travelers." I just chuckled and said, "But this one, Debs, I'll remember forever." And you know what? I still remember it like it was yesterday. The salt, the sweat, the fight, the gentle release. That's the thing about fishing, friend. It's not just about the catch. It's about the journey. It's about the moments of quiet contemplation, the connection with nature, and sometimes it's about the ones that got away. And that, my friend, is a story I'll carry with me until the day the tide takes me away. Now, how about another glass of tea? I tell you, this next tale's been sitting with me for years, and every time I think on it, I swear it gets better. Let's get to it. Ah, yes, there was that time, down on the Black River, back in, oh lordy, must have been around 88, maybe 89. Time flies faster than a hummingbird in heat, I'm telling you. Now the Black River, beautiful place it is, or was back then. Still pretty now, I reckon, but different. Things always change, don't they? Anyway, back then, the Black River was wilder, less touched, you could say, especially down past the old paper mill. Now that paper mill, that's important to this story. It wasn't the cleanest operation, not by a long shot. They used to dump all sorts of, well, let's just say things you wouldn't want swimming in, right into the river. Folks around here, we knew it, but back then, nobody said much. Jobs were jobs, you know. Keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, and keep fishing. And fish I did. Black River catfish were legendary. Big, meaty, tasty. Well, most of them were. I had my favorite spot, a little bend in the river, about 3 miles downstream from the mill. Deep hole there, with a big old cypress tree leaning over the water, roots all tangled in the bank. Perfect catfish hangout. I used to go there every chance I got, early mornings mostly, when the river was still misty and quiet, just the sound of the water and the birds waking up. Peaceful, calm, just what an old fisherman needs. Now usually, I'd catch your regular run-of-the-mill catfish there. Blues, channels, maybe a flathead if I was lucky. Good size, maybe a couple of pounds to 10, 15 on a really good day. Enough for supper, and maybe a little extra to sell down at the market. But one day was different. It was a day just like today, actually. Warm, sunny, little breeze kicking up. I got to my spot just as the sun was peeking over the trees, making the river sparkle like it was sprinkled with diamonds. Perfect fishing weather, I thought to myself. I baited up my line with some chicken liver. Catfish just can't resist that stuff, and cast it out into the deep hole under that cypress. And I waited. Now fishing ain't just about catching fish, you know. It's about the waiting, the thinking, the watching the world go by. It's therapy, pure and simple. Just me, the river, and the quiet of nature. I was leaning back against that cypress, closing my eyes, just listening to the river gurgle by, when bam, my pole nearly jumped right out of my hands. Now, I've had big catfish hit my line before, but this was different. This wasn't no gentle tug. This was like hooking into a runaway train. My reel was screaming, line peeling off like it was on fire. I grabbed that pole tight, braced myself against the bank, and set the hook hard. Whatever was on the other end of that line, it was big, really big. The fight was on, and boy, what a fight it was. This fish pulled and tugged, dove deep, ran sideways, everything it could to get away. It was like fighting an underwater tractor. I'm telling you, my arms were aching, my back was creaking, sweat was beading up on my forehead. But I wasn't about to give up, not after a hit like that. I've been fishing too long to back down from a challenge. Now usually, when you're fighting a big fish, you can kind of feel what it is, the way it pulls, the way it shakes its head. You get a sense of whether it's a catfish, a bass, a carp, whatever. But this was something else. It felt different, heavier, stronger, angrier somehow. And the longer I fought it, the more uneasy I started to feel. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 20 minutes, I started to gain some ground. Slowly, inch by inch, I started to crank that reel, pulling the fish up from the depths. And then I saw it. It surfaced about 50 feet out, thrashing and splashing like a wounded whale. And that's when I got my first good look at it. And let me tell you, my jaw nearly dropped to the riverbank. It was a catfish, all right, no doubt about that. But it wasn't like any catfish I'd ever seen in my life. This thing was, well, it was glowing. Not like a light bulb, mind you, but a faint, greenish, sickly sort of glow, especially around its whiskers and its fins and its eyes. Lord have mercy, its eyes were like two red coals burning in the murky water. And the size of it, it was huge. I mean, truly monstrous. I reckon it was at least 4 feet long, maybe 5, and as thick as a log. Its skin wasn't the usual catfish color either. It was patchy, almost like it was molting, with these strange, pale, almost translucent areas mixed in with the normal, dark brown. And it had growths, lumpy, fleshy growths all along its back and sides, looking like tumors or something. It was something straight out of a horror movie, I tell you. Wasn't the Sam Hill, I muttered to myself, reeling it in closer, but now a lot slower, a lot more cautious. I was no longer thinking about supper. Now I was just thinking about survival. This wasn't no ordinary fish. This was something else entirely. As I got it closer to the bank, I could smell it. A strange, metallic, almost chemical smell, mixed with the usual fishy river scent. And I started to put two and two together. The paper mill, the strange glow, the growths, the size. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a big catfish. This was a mutant, a radioactive mutant, most likely, thanks to all that stuff they were dumping in the river upstream. Now, I'm no scientist. I'm just a simple fisherman, but I knew enough to know that radiation ain't good. And this fish, well, it looked like it had been marinating in the stuff for years. My heart started thumping in my chest like a drum solo. Fear, real fear, started to creep into my bones. But you know what? Underneath the fear, there was also curiosity. Yeah, curious. I know, sounds crazy, right? Here I am, face to face with some kind of glow-in-the-dark monster fish, and I'm curious. But that's just how I am, I guess. Always been a bit of a curious soul, and maybe a little bit reckless too, or maybe just plain foolish. Take your pick. Anyway, I got it right up to the edge of the bank. It was still thrashing weakly, its red eyes glaring up at me. I could see its teeth now, long and sharp, looking like they could bite right through a steel cable. I knew I couldn't bring it in the boat. No way. That thing was too dangerous, too unnatural. So, what did I do? Well, I did the only thing I could think of. I reached for my pliers, the ones I always carry to unhook fish, and I decided I was going to cut the line. Let it go. Let it go back to whatever dark radioactive depths it came from. Some fish just ain't meant to be caught. And this was definitely one of them. But just as I was about to cut the line, something happened. The fish, it stopped thrashing. It just went still. And its red eyes, they seemed to soften somehow. Almost like it was looking at me. Not in an angry way, but almost like it was asking for help. Now, I know what you're thinking. Jerry, you imagine things. It's just a fish. But I swear to you, son, that's what it felt like. It felt like this mutant catfish, this creature of the radioactive river, was looking at me with understanding, with maybe even a little bit of sadness. And in that moment, something changed in me. The fear, it faded away, replaced by pity, I guess, and maybe a little bit of guilt. Guilt that we humans, we had done this to this creature, turned it into this freak of nature. So I didn't cut the line. Instead, I did something even crazier. I gently, carefully reached down and unhooked it. Yeah, I know, sounds insane. Reaching down and unhooking a glowing mutant radioactive catfish. But I did it. Slowly, calmly, just like I was unhooking any other fish. Except this time my hands were shaking like leaves in a hurricane. And you know what? It let me. It didn't bite, didn't thrash, didn't even move. It just lay there, still as a stone, while I worked the hook free. And when I finally got it out, I just let go of the line and watched. The catfish, it just lay there for a moment, floating in the water. Then, slowly, almost deliberately, it turned its head and looked at me one more time. Those red eyes, they seemed to flicker like a dying ember. And then With a slow, powerful flick of its tail, it vanished, sunk back down into the dark depths of the Black River. Gone. I stood there for a long time, watching the ripples fade away, just trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Had I imagined it? Had it been a hallucination, brought on by the sun and the heat? Or had I really just wrestled with, and then released, a radioactive mutant catfish? I don't know for sure. Maybe it was just the biggest catfish I ever caught, and my mind just played tricks on me, made it into something it wasn't. But I don't think so. I think deep down, I know what I saw that day, and I know why I let it go. I packed up my gear that day and walked back to my truck, a lot quieter than when I'd arrived. Didn't catch another fish that day. Didn't even want to. Just drove home and sat on this porch, just like I'm sitting now, looking out at the lake and thinking. I never went back to that spot on the Black River. Not after that. Sometimes I wonder what happened to that catfish. Is it still down there, glowing in the dark, getting bigger and stranger with each passing year? Or did it not make it? Did the radiation finally catch up to it? I don't know. And maybe it's better that way. Some things are best left a mystery. But I'll tell you one thing, son. That day on the Black River, it changed me. Made me think differently about things. About the river. About the fish. About us. About what we do to this world. And what it does to us in return. So, there you have it. The tale of the radioactive mutant catfish of the Black River. A true story? Well, that's for you to decide. But I swear, every word of it is as true as I remember it. And in the end, maybe that's all that matters, eh? The memory of it, the feeling of it, the lesson of it, maybe. I was just sitting here, remembering another time out on the water, and I figured, why keep it to myself? Let me tell you all about it. Now I was probably, maybe 55, 56 years old at the time. Still had a good bit of salt left in my beard, but the years were starting to show. But my boat, the Sea Serpent, she was still chugging along, faithful as ever. I'd had her for over 30 years, and she knew the waters of the Gulf of Mexico better than I knew the back of my hand. It was a scorcher of a July morning, the kind that makes the air shimmer like a mirage. The sun was already beaten down hard by 6, and the humidity was thick enough you could chew on it. I remember wiping the sweat off my brow as I pulled out of the harbor in Biloxi, the Sea Serpent groaning a little as she got underway. I was after red snapper that day, a good mess of them to sell down at the market. I'd been having decent luck, but I was hoping for a real haul. Bait was fresh, tackle was ready, and I had a cooler full of ice. I was set. I headed out to my usual spot, about 20 miles offshore, where the reef dropped off sharp. The GPS coordinates were burned into my memory after all these years. I eased the anchor down, hooked up my line with some cut mullet, and waited. Regular as clockwork. The snapper started biting. I was pulling him in pretty steady for a couple of hours. Nothing huge, mind you. Mostly 2-3 pounders, but enough to make it worth my while. The sun climbed higher, the air got stickier, and the snapper started to slow down. I figured they'd gone deeper to escape the heat. That's when I decided to change things up. I figured I'd troll around a bit, maybe see if I could snag a king mackerel or two. They like to cruise around those reef edges, chasing bait fish. So I pulled up the anchor, cranked up the engine, and started to motor slowly along the edge of the reef, dragging a couple of lures behind me. Now I'd caught my share of mackerel and even a few wahoo over the years, but I'd always dreamed of catching a marlin. They were the kings of the Gulf, majestic creatures that could fight like hell. I'd seen pictures, heard stories, but never had one on the line. Honestly, I figured I never would. I was just about to give up on the trolling idea and head back to my original spot when it happened. The reel on my heavy-duty rod, the one I usually used for sharks, started screaming like a banshee. That wasn't no mackerel. That was something big. I grabbed the rod, and the force nearly ripped it out of my hands. Whatever was on the other end was pulling like a freight train. The sea serpent started to list to one side as the line screamed off the reel. My heart was pounding like a drum solo. "All right," I muttered to myself. "Easy does it, Jerry. Don't get too excited." I adjusted the drag, trying to find that sweet spot between letting the fish run and putting too much pressure on the line. I knew that if I clamped down too hard, it would snap. But if I let it run too much, it would spool me. The fight was on. For the first few minutes, all I could do was hold on. This thing was just taking line, heading out to open water like it owned the place. I could feel the power in every jerk and pull. It was an exhilarating, terrifying feeling. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the fish started to slow down a little. I started to gradually reel in some line, gaining a few feet with each turn of the handle. It was slow, agonizing work. My arms burned, my back ached, and sweat poured down my face. I finally managed to get a little bit of the line back, and then the fish jumped. It breached the surface of the water in a spectacular display of power, silver and black scales glinting in the sunlight. I could see its long, spear-like bill and its massive size. It was a marlin, and not just any marlin. This was a monster. "Holy Mary, Mother of God," I whispered. "That's a damn blue one." Now, I knew I was in for a fight. A marlin like that wasn't going to give up easy. I settled in for the long haul, knowing that this could take hours. As I fought the marlin, I started to think about everything I knew about them. I knew they were apex predators, built for speed and power. I knew they were solitary creatures, roaming the oceans in search of food. I knew they were a symbol of the wild, untamed beauty of the sea. I also knew that they were in trouble. Overfishing, pollution, and habitat destruction were threatening their survival. It made me think about what I was doing too. Here I am, this old man trying to catch one of these things. I started to question myself. Should I really be doing this? Was it worth the risk? To the fish? To myself? Just for the thrill of the fight? But then the marlin would surge again, pulling me back to the present moment, back to the battle. I couldn't afford to get distracted. I had to focus on what I was doing. Hour after hour, the fight went on. The sun climbed higher in the sky. The heat grew more intense, and my muscles burned with exhaustion. But I refused to give up. I was determined to see this thing through to the end, one way or another. Sometimes the marlin would run, taking out hundreds of yards of line. Other times it would sound, diving deep into the depths. And then it would jump again, a breathtaking display of raw power. Each time it jumped, it tested my resolve, pushing me to my limits. I drank water, ate a bit of a sandwich, and kept fighting. I knew I had to stay hydrated and keep my energy up if I wanted to have any chance of winning this battle. As the hours passed, I started to feel a strange connection to the marlin. I respected its strength, its tenacity, its will to survive. I also felt a sense of guilt. I was trying to kill something that was so magnificent, so powerful, so vital to the ocean ecosystem. But I pushed those thoughts aside. I couldn't afford to get sentimental. I was in the middle of a fight, and I had to focus on winning. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the marlin started to tire. Its runs became shorter, its jumps less frequent. I could feel that I was gaining the upper hand. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to reel it in, inch by inch. My arms ached, my back screamed, but I kept going. I knew that if I gave up now, I would never forgive myself. As the marlin got closer, I could see it more clearly. It was even bigger than I had imagined. It was a magnificent creature with shimmering silver scales, a long pointed bill, and powerful, graceful fins. When I finally got it close enough to the boat, I reached for my gaff. But then I hesitated. I looked into the marlin's eye, and I saw something there, a kind of ancient wisdom, a quiet understanding of the natural world. In that moment, something changed in me. I realized that I couldn't kill this fish. It wasn't about the trophy, or the bragging rights, or the money. It was about respect, about honoring the life of this incredible creature. So I did something that surprised even myself. I lowered the gaff, reached for my knife, and cut the line. The marlin paused for a moment, as if surprised by my actions. Then, with a flick of its tail, it disappeared into the depths. I stood there for a long time, watching the spot where the marlin had disappeared. I felt a mixture of relief, sadness, and exhilaration. I had lost the fight, but I had won something more important. I had honored my own conscience. I reeled in the line, stowed my gear, and started the engine. As I headed back to shore, I couldn't stop smiling. I had a story to tell, a story about the one that got away, a story about respect and the wildness of the sea. Now the story doesn't quite finish there. When I got back to Biloxi, word about my encounter with the marlin had already spread like wildfire. Fishermen, dock workers, and even some tourists gathered around the sea serpent to hear my tale. They were all amazed by the size of the fish, and they were even more amazed by what I did, or rather what I didn't do. "You cut the line?" one of the fishermen asked, incredulous. "After all that fighting? You must be crazy, Jerry." I just shrugged. "Maybe I am," I said, "but I couldn't do it. It just didn't feel right." Some of them shook their heads, but others nodded in understanding. They knew what it was like to feel a connection to the sea, to respect the creatures that lived there. That night, I went down to the local bar, the Salty Dog, where all the fishermen hung out. As soon as I walked in, everyone started to cheer. "Jerry! Jerry! Jerry!" they chanted. The owner of the bar, Maggie, a tough old woman who knew her way around a fishing boat, came over and gave me a hug. "You're a legend, Jerry," she said. "You showed them all what it means to be a true fisherman." She bought me a beer, and I sat down at the bar, surrounded by my friends and colleagues. We talked about the marlin, about the fight, about the decision I made. As I sat there listening to their stories and their laughter, I realized that I had done the right thing. I had stayed true to myself, and I had earned the respect of my community. But the real reward came a few weeks later. I was out fishing again, trolling along the same reef where I had encountered the marlin. I was hoping to catch a few king mackerel, but I wasn't expecting much. Suddenly I saw something in the distance, a flash of silver, a swirl of water. It was a marlin, and it was heading straight towards my boat. As it got closer, I could see that it was the same marlin I had fought weeks before. I recognized the distinctive markings on its side, the scars from previous battles. The marlin swam right up to the sea serpent and circled the boat a few times. It looked at me with its big, wise eyes, as if to say thank you. Then with a graceful flick of its tail, it swam away, disappearing into the depths once again. I sat there for a long time, watching the spot where it had disappeared. I felt a sense of peace, a sense of gratitude. I knew that I had been blessed, that I had been given a gift. From that day on, I never looked at fishing the same way again. I still loved the challenge, the excitement, the thrill of the catch. But I also had a deeper appreciation for the beauty and the fragility of the ocean ecosystem. I started practicing catch and release more, and I took greater care to minimize my impact on the environment. And every time I went out to that reef, I always looked for that marlin. I never saw it again, but I knew that it was out there, swimming free, a symbol of the wild, untamed spirit of the sea. Hope you're ready, because this next story's got a pull to it, just like a big one on the line. Let's get to it. The air was thick with salt and the weight of a brewing storm when I set out that morning. The kind of morning where the sky hovers between dark gray and the first signs of daybreak, and the sea, she doesn't know whether she wants to be calm or restless. And that was the thing about fishing. Every day was a gamble. Some days you'd come back with a net so full, you'd swear the ocean was handing you a gift. Other days, you'd come back empty, staring at the waves like they held a secret you weren't meant to know. But every time, you returned, drawn back by something deeper than the promise of a good haul. I had been fishing for over 45 years by then, long enough to know when the ocean was whispering warnings. That morning, she wasn't whispering. She was rumbling, restless beneath the hull of my boat as I navigated out past the jetty, beyond where the casual weekenders would dare to go. It was just me in the deep, the way it had always been. The anticipation of the unknown sent a thrill through me, the same thrill I had felt the first time I'd set sail as a young man. The wind had a bite to it, sharper than usual for that time of year, making the boat shudder with each gust. I gripped the wheel tighter as Eleanor swayed under the force, her hull groaning in protest. The biting wind wasn't just cold, it had a push to it, a presence that forced me to compensate with each turn. Every movement felt deliberate, calculated, as I fought to keep the boat steady against the invisible hands of the storm gathering on the horizon. I pulled my hat down low and adjusted my grip on the wheel. The boat, an old but reliable thing I had named Eleanor after my mother, cut through the waves with the kind of ease that comes from years of knowing how to work with the current rather than against it. The engine hummed in steady rhythm, a sound I had long since come to associate with comfort, with control. I checked my gauges, made sure my lines were secured, and pressed on. I knew my spots, the places where the fish gathered, where the water spoke of promise, rather than disappointment. That day, I aimed for a stretch of sea that had been generous to me in the past. It was deeper out there, less predictable, but that was the risk you took when you made your living on the water. The best catches weren't found in safe, shallow waters. They were out here, in the deep, where you had to earn them. The silence of the open sea always settled in after a while, the kind that pressed against you, made you feel like the only soul for miles. It was a deceptive kind of peace, the sort that lulled you into stillness, made you forget that out here, nothing was ever truly at rest. That same silence would soon be shattered by the raw struggle between man and fish, a battle of will and endurance that reminded you just how alive the ocean really was. But for now, in that quiet stretch of waiting, there was only me, the gentle rise and fall of the water, and the knowledge that soon the fight would begin. I've always loved that feeling, the solitude, the freedom. A good fisherman knows how to wait. It's a patience that grows in you, like the slow pull of a tide. You learn to read the way the water shifts, the way the birds circle overhead, the way the line moves in your hands. And sometimes, when you're really listening, the ocean speaks back. And then I felt it, a tug stronger than I expected. Not the jerking fight of a smaller fish, but something steady, something that made my hands tighten around the reel. I exhaled slowly, bracing myself, and started to pull. The line went taut, vibrating with the kind of energy that tells you this isn't going to be easy. It yanked hard, and I stumbled back a step, my boots slipping slightly on the damp deck. I had hooked something big. Minutes passed, my muscles straining as I worked to bring whatever was on the other end closer. The sea around me was restless now, waves slapping against the hull of Eleanor as if trying to shake me loose. The wind had picked up, howling in my ears, but I held firm. I could feel the weight of it, the pull of something massive, something determined to fight to the bitter end. My heart pounded, adrenaline rushing through me as I adjusted my grip and leaned into the battle. Then, for the first time, I saw it. A flash of silver beneath the surface, enormous, thrashing. A tuna, and not just any tuna, a monster of a fish, bigger than any I had seen in years. My heart pounded, adrenaline surging through me. This was the kind of catch that fishermen dreamed of, the kind that could make a man's whole season in a single haul. But the fish wasn't ready to give up. It dove deep, taking my line with it. I gritted my teeth, adjusted my stance, and let it run just enough to tire itself out. I had played this game before. It was a battle of endurance now. Who would give in first? The storm was closer now. I could taste the electricity in the air, feel the way the sky had darkened. The waves were angrier, the boat rocking in protest. But I wasn't letting go. Not now. Not after fighting this hard. Another pull, another surge of strength. And then finally the fish began to give. Slowly, inch by inch, I reeled it in, my arms burning with the effort. When it finally broke the surface, I knew I had won. Hauling it onto the boat took every last ounce of strength I had. It flopped, powerful even in its final moments, but I steadied myself and secured it. The wind howled around me, the first drops of rain stinging my face. I looked up at the sky and then back at my prize. I turned Eleanor toward home, the storm now fully upon me. The sea raged, waves crashing against the sides, but I held my course. I had faced worse, and I wasn't about to lose this fight now. By the time I reached the dock, the storm had spent itself, leaving behind only the scent of rain and the calm that comes after chaos. I sat for a moment, catching my breath, staring at the fish that had nearly bested me. Fishing isn't just about the catch. It's about the fight, the patience, the respect between man and sea. And that day, I had earned my place once again. Just me, the ocean, and a story worth telling. When I finally made it back to the cabin, Debbie was waiting for me, her arms crossed and that knowing look on her face. She didn't have to ask if it had been a good haul. She could see it in my eyes, in the exhaustion weighing down my bones. She just smiled, shook her head, and said, "Well, Jerry, I reckon you got another one for the books. Now get in here before you catch cold." I took one last look at the ocean before stepping inside, knowing full well that as long as I could hold a rod in my hands, I'd be back out there again, chasing the next big one, living the life I was born for. That night, as I sat in my chair by the fire, the warmth soaking into my bones, I thought about all the times I had been out there on the water, the fights, the struggles, the victories, and the losses. Every trip left its mark, etched into the lines of my hands and the stories in my heart. As Debbie handed me a steaming mug of coffee, I knew I wouldn't trade a single second of it for anything else in the world. The sea had given me another story, another battle, another moment where I had stood against the tide and come out the other side. And tomorrow, I'd do it all over again. And so the cycle continued, as it always had, and as long as I had strength left in my body, I would keep returning to the only life I've ever known. Well, now, I sure hope y'all enjoyed those stories as much as I enjoyed telling them. Ain't nothing better than sitting back, swapping tales, and feeling like we're all out on the water together. I'll be back tomorrow, same as always, with another one for you. Maybe something that'll have you smelling the bayou air or feeling that tug on the line, like you're right there with me. Till then, y'all rest easy, keep your spirits high, and don't forget, the best stories are the ones we carry with us. See y'all soon, and please feel free to sit back and enjoy the sounds of nature.